One of the things, as I look around this table, I know that you did a PhD, and were employed teaching,
Right.
and you have your undergraduate degree done, and you were involved in ministry. This is before going to seminary,
Right,
and that you were working full time at Monticello.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I often hear from guys who are thinking about priesthood is, it just takes so long, from where you start to where you finish. It's a long process, and it's longer than it was 25 years ago in many senses. But it's also changed. Back, 40 years ago, guys would go to a college seminary right out of high school, and kind of be in the process 8 years and then get ordained. But nowadays, it's guys like you who have work experience and lots of other life and education experience. And then the church comes along and says, well, now, with giving all of that even, it's going to be another 5 or 6 or 7 years. And for some men, that's really daunting and can stir up the fear of, am I going to make it? Use the image of the rock climbing wall. Am I going to make this? This just takes so long. Did you experience that at all? I mean, each of you came at it from very different places in your lives, but...
It was daunting. I thought I was done. I had no intention of ever going back to school. I didn't want to open another book. I didn't want to do any of that. And all of a sudden, I found myself filling out an application and realizing, okay, if I turn this in, it's a minimum of 6 years. It's 6 years. That's 5 years of schooling. That's 10 semesters. That's how many papers. That's how many. I have to go move out of the state to do this. I don't really want to. I just want to stay here. I want to be where I feel like I should be. Is this worth it? It's a matter of just trying it. One of the best pieces of advice I had heard from young priests and older priests alike was just try the year. And get out there into that first pastoral summer that you guys have in Richmond, and try it and see what God's going to do with that, and then make your decision. Don't do anything before that. Just persevere through that year and recognize it's 2 semesters. You can handle that. You've done it before. Just go try it and then see what happens.
You're learning all this stuff that's really wonderful, but even if you love what you're doing academically, you think, what does this have to do with anything? And that every summer, but particularly the first summer of pastoral work in the church, I always call those translation periods. All of that stuff helps you to be pastoral, but that's not obvious a lot of the time when you're in the courses. And so it's that pastoral summer. I mean, a lot of the guys in Richmond Diocese, seminarians and now young priests, have said that first summer sort of was what sold them on it, because they realized this is really what this is oriented towards.
Entered with very little prior education, maybe like a semester's worth of community college classes. So, yeah, I mean, the academics was something I was a little weird, just scared about, I guess, or worried about. Would I be able to handle it?
God can call anybody if you're willing to allow God to work in it. In time, you pick it up. You recognize the passions that God has given you, but then you see little aspects of theology that you thought you knew way off here in the distance, but you see how the church has come to that idea based on these little tiny things that you think are inconsequential now. And that sparks your passion to say, okay, let's start weaving through. And then you pick up a book, and then you pick up another book, and before you know it, you've collected your own little library, and God is drawing up these passions in your heart that you thought you could never have in the academic world. You thought, man, I'm just a practical kind of guy. Just lay it out in front of me. Put a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in front of me. Don't put this random exotic fish dish. I don't want that. Just give me the sandwich and I'm done and I'm happy. But all of a sudden you fall in love with it. And if you can hold on to the practical side of yourself, then you can draw it back into the parish. And a whole world of love and of life of Christ and His church comes open for not just for yourself, but for the people that you begin to minister to as you get out into that first assignment, back in the diocese in the summer, or that first pastoral experience that they throw you into in your seminary in whatever city you happen to be in. And it's absolutely fantastic.
Men who are thinking about the priesthood should never let their whatever past educational level they have keep them from thinking about seminary. I mean, Eric has just said that he had limited college education before he went to seminary, but the seminary that you are attending enabled you to do everything that you needed to do to have the same level of education that everybody else needs and is required to have as a priest. So I think there are probably a lot of people out there who think, well, I never finished college, or I didn't do very well in high school. The diocese, our diocese, any diocese, it's not about, I mean, a calling to priesthood is not equal to a calling to studies, academic studies. I mean, not at all. That's an important element, but it's a lot more than that, which is what you're saying.
For me, it was, you walk into that foyer and you see the gospel writers, the statues of the gospel writers on either side of you. And it hit me, this is not about academics. This is not about graduating with a cap and my diploma to get my master's degree in theology, but it's to become a priest for the people back home. Keep that logged in your head, Brian, as you walk through. And the first thing, as you walk through those front doors and you look up, you're seeing the chapel, down the hallway a bit. That's the first thing. Brian, your formation here is centered first and foremost in prayer, and they're to teach you to be a man of prayer, so that you can go back into the community and be a man of prayer in the midst of a world that doesn't know how to pray, that doesn't know how to keep silence, that doesn't know how to draw close to God. That's why you're here. Your formation in terms of academics surrounds that and filters through all of that, but you first begin as a man of prayer.
Purpose, I think, is so that when you come out of there, that you're just a well-rounded person. You've been formed academically, you've been formed spiritually, you've been formed as a human person, you've been formed pastorally, and all those kind of four areas are the key areas that the seminary kind of looks at in your life and challenge you on when maybe you're not doing so well, or in areas that you need to grow, and also encourages you when you're doing well. So the kind of the key, the end result is hopefully a person who's deeply spiritual and in love with Christ, and is well formed and can relate to people, and who wants to share all that.
But just spiritually and sort of humanly, I'm a very different person. I've grown up a lot, and in ways that I didn't know that I needed to grow up, and in areas in which I'd never been challenged, but I needed to be challenged at the very least to get rid of a lot of pride. Yeah. And these sorts of things, and it hurts when you're going through it. I mean, and I don't think any of us should shy away from that. But it's a suffering for Christ that He uses to draw us into being our better selves, just as human beings. It's a rare sort of formation in the Christian life that I think a lot of people would love to have, even if they're not thinking about priesthood or religious life.
Some of that really comes to light when a guy leaves formation, especially when he leaves on his own because he feels like God is calling him out. Here he spent, some of my classmates, 1, 2, 3 years, we've been in the same formation process together, and all of a sudden we find ourselves being separated, and he's heading out in another direction. And there's obviously the sense of loss because you're losing a brother in the midst of this really strong community. But at the same time, there's a rejoicing that happens, and there's a thankfulness that goes out to God and part of everybody when they realize a guy leaves because God is calling him out, because he needs to go out and pursue whatever vocation God is ultimately calling him to, and he's a better man because of it. And I'm thinking about one particular guy in particular. He'll be a better father, a better husband, because he gave himself to the formation process. And even though it didn't end up leading toward ordination as a priest, it ended up drawing him closer to Christ and closer to the world.